Hi, and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 47, and we're going to talk about restoring the balance in HBG draft. And for the first time in history, Wizards had the opportunity and used the opportunity to twitch some cards mid-format to see if they can reduce imbalance in the historic Horizons Baldur's Gate format. Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate draft. So we're going to talk about what is imbalance, how did this imbalance look across different formats, what color pair win rate changes did we observe, which card win rate changes did we see thanks to those twitches that Wizards did, and then we're just basically going to explore the idea of the direct versus knock-on effects that changes in cards have caused. But before we start, I am a sponsored podcaster slash streamer slash seminar maker slash YouTuber. So a word from the sponsor, mtgazone.com, where you can find all kinds of news Magic related. You can find not only limited content, but we're approaching the most important time for limited people in the spoiler season. So there will be plenty of content then. I'm pretty sure that J2S Josh and Eki are going to maybe concoct some kind of tier list. I'm going to probably make a removal and tricks guide for the format. So there's going to be things happening very soon. It's worth checking it out. I think that we're going to be very rejuvenated after the summer. People are coming back from holidays. There's going to be a lot of things happening in the Magic world. So it's a perfect time to start drafting. I can give you a small spoiler that next week I'm already writing an article that will be a sort of guide for very beginning players on how to start drafting, how to use the first data in order to play your first drafts, and what is important to start drafting. So that's going to be there next week. And if you're not into limited, well, A, what are you doing here? I'm strictly limited talking person. But B, fear not, they have plenty of constructed form content which you can dive into. They have plenty of anything from all the formats into Vortos related stuff. So you should find anything you need in there, including my articles, which are coming back after the hiatus due to my holiday. But okay, let's go on with the seminar. And as always, I start with a small preamble that gives me time to warm up a bit before I go into the boring world of data. So today's preamble is designing and selecting best metrics is key to describe anything precisely. And this is not only the Magic Limited issue, but it's an issue that we'll find in everything in life. Carefully choosing the right metric to describe something is a difference between coming to the right conclusion and coming to the wrong conclusion. And in Magic, the super extreme examples might be win rate when you cast a spell. Some cards will have an extremely high win rate when you cast them. For example, I don't know, if there was a card that would cost 24 mana and it would say you win the game, every time you cast it, you win the game. Well, let's say that it was uncounterable, okay? Every time you cast it, you win the game, or 99.9% of the time you cast it, you win the game. But that doesn't mean the card is good, because 24 mana is quite a lot, so you'll be only able to cast it in particular games. Yes, of course, you can construct the deck around it, a deck that will survive for 17 turns if need be, and then you can cast it and win. But in many games, you will not be able to cast it. So thinking that this card has 100% win rate would be a grave error. That's why we don't use that kind of metric. That's why in 17 lands, we either use games played win rate, which means that shows you how many games did you win when the card was in your deck. Or if you want to focus specifically on the card's power, you can get a game in hand win rate when you only look at the games when the card was drawn and check the win rate. Now, again, here we have two different metrics, and we have to think about when to apply them. For example, if I draft and if I would follow game win rates in the draft in order to inform my picks. In my first picks, my first couple of picks, I probably would actually look at the games played statistic, because the games played statistic has two main components. One is the power of the card that you are picking, and the other is the power of the context that the card is in, so the text that it usually is in. So if I have a card that is pretty powerful on its own, so it has high game and hand win rate, it doesn't tell me that much, because maybe it has a high game and hand win rate, but uh, the decks it's in are actually quite poor. So I would rather focus on the games played win rate, because that shows me the context of not only the card but also the rest of the deck, because right now I'm still in the position when I can actually try to draft in order to get close to the deck where the card would be good. So already there, we're looking at particular metrics that would tell me something else. Now, if I'm later in the draft and I am drafting a very aggressive deck, um, I might actually look, if I have to choose between two cards that have similar win rates, I might look at the opening hand win rate of that card as a tiebreaker. Because if I'm playing an aggressive deck, my games will tend to be shorter. If the games tend to be shorter, the chance of drawing any card is smaller, which means that the bigger percentage of the cards I draw are on my opening hand. So I want the cards that have a high opening win rate, because they seem to be going together with my plan. And this is exactly the same with balance in the format that we're going to talk about today. You can measure it in multiple ways, and different ways answer slightly different questions and give you slightly different answer. So for the majority of the first of the seminar, we're going to actually look at different ways of measuring, and then try to think what that means for you in terms of what kind of conclusions can you draw from that. And maybe it's a bit painstaking, but it's important to think about the metrics that you're using a bit deeper, because if you don't, then you tend to fall into a trap of using metrics blindly, and then because you're using the metrics blindly, coming to the wrong conclusions based on the data that is not sufficient to draw certain conclusions. So, careful selection of metrics is a key point for you to improve in how you use the data. And basically, the whole preamble, the main point of it is think. Before you use a metric, think. Can I use this metric here? Is it smart to use it here, or am I actually using a metric just to confirm my pre-concluded ideas and feel good about ourselves because we selected because we confirmed what we thought before? Or do you want to learn how the situation looks more realistically, and you want to pick the metrics more carefully and based on what would be most appropriate for a particular question? Right. So just a summary of the data. I used a bunch of data because I used, basically all the sets since Magic 19, I think, for these analysis. But specifically for the data on Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate, I use 17lands.com data. I always use 17lands.com data. I urge everyone else to use 17lands.com data. I mean, that shouldn't come as a surprise to most of you. And the data set for HBG is roughly 280,000 games in best of one Premier Draft. So before we venture into the rest of the seminar, maybe it's a good time to think about what balance in the format is. And balance, equilibrium, even balance, well, if you translate it from Latin, between different components of the format. And you can look at the balance in multiple ways, but because of what happened in the HBG, I'm going to look at color-specific balance. But if you think about it, you can also look at the balance between rarities, for example. I think that when we describe formats as pauper, so format where commons are the decisive pieces of cardboard that make or break decks, or princely formats where rares and mythic rares are super important, and because of the density of bombs, the commons are not that important because you play a game and at some stage one of the players plays a bomb and it completely negates what was going on before that bomb was dropped. So there is a sort of balance between different rarities of cards. You can also look at the balance from the perspective of archetypes. So you can think, oh well, most archetypes are playable, but 2 archetypes are not playable at all, and that ruins the format because we can only draft 8 archetypes. But I think it gets even worse when you look at the colors, because if one color is way too good, or if one color is way worse than all the other things, this impacts 40% of the archetypes, because there are 4 archetypes out of 10 from each color. So if you have one color that is really, really weak, it will highly impact 4 archetypes that have them. And that's a large chunk of what happens. If 2 archetypes don't work as they were supposed to, well, tough luck, but you still only lose 25% of the 20% of the combinations. If you lose 40% of the combinations, that's quite a lot. It's basically you're limited to a very small chunk of the metagame, like barely more than a half of what is possible. And balance or imbalance can be due to 2 main things. One will be card power parity. So basically, is the card power in different colors same? There's a big difference, small difference. But it also can be due to the self-correcting draft nature. So you can imagine that if there is a color that's not strong but has some potential, you're just going to draft it less. So you only draft it when you get particular good cards. And because you draft it and usually you don't have competition because other people also know that this color is not so good, then sometimes you will actually get very playable decks with that color, and you will be able to ameliorate the lower quality of the cards by the fact that the color is more open, so you get better chance of wheeling those cards, and you can fill in with the other colors, and the synergies are there, so that's fine. So self-correcting nature of the draft can help with some bits of color disproportion or imbalance in power between colors. And I think that someone asked me that on Twitter before I started, but I didn't have time to explore the time lapse of how balance of colors changes as the format progresses. But I think that as the format lasts longer, first of all, the less involved players stop drafting, and you only get with the more hardcore players. Second of all, people understand which cards are powerful and which cards are not. So due to that, over the course of the format, the poorer, the weaker of the colors will become more open, and therefore people can get into that color and reap some benefits of it being slightly more open, despite the power not being as high as anywhere else. Right. So before I did the seminar, I went to Twitter, the absolute font of wisdom, and I asked the people, so which recent set had, in your opinion, the most balance between colors? Mind you that it's colors, not archetypes, so that people know that I'm not thinking about the 2 color combinations, but just colors. And I asked about 3 particular sets, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, Crimson Vow, and Strixhaven. I did not choose those sets by accident. So I'm going to start with that, telling you that I didn't choose them by accident at all. And the people have spoken. More than half of the answers that were not just checking the results indicated that Kamigawa was the most balanced set in the recent history. And then Strixhaven and Crimson Vow were split roughly even between the rest of the votes, roughly 25% of the votes that were cast on something that has meaning. So, yeah, that's a result. That's what people are thinking. But then this is a subjective opinion of some people on Twitter, so probably quite invested, so that their subjective opinion is somewhat informed. But it's very hard for me to sit down and tell you who was right. The people that said Strixhaven were right, without trying to at least measure what balance in the colors is. And there's plenty ways to measure the color balance. And I decided to, at least in this exploratory stage, look at two main metrics for the balance between colors. First one of them will be color win rate, and the second one will be color draft preference. I'll explain those terms in detail in a second. But first of all, color win rate is the win rate of all decks playing a given color. And for the simplicity of the analysis and my sanity, I decided to be looking only at two color decks. So I basically looked at the win rates of two color decks and extract the win rates of the decks that contain particular colors. So for example, if I looked at the power of white decks, I looked at the win rate of Selesnya, Azorius, Orzhov, and Boros, and I calculated their total win rate. Now, I did it in a way, I didn't just take 4 win rates of those 4 archetypes, divided them by 4, added them up, divided by 4, and boom, voila, we have an average win rate. Because people don't draft them with the same frequency. And it's important to know that if an archetype is drafted more frequently, obviously this will mean that the color is stronger or weaker based on the win rates because of this disproportion. So, for example, if Selesnya has a really, really poor win rate, let's say 48%, and the other white color combinations are having high win rate, and moreover 90% of the games with white decks are in the 3 ones that are strong, and only 10% of the games are in the weak archetype, then of course by giving the proportion to the win rate we achieve better result. So by doing that, we sort of take the archetype power into account, because of course people, especially 17 lands user who are invested players, will draft good color combination, will try to draft good color combinations more frequently, and they will often succeed in that. So if we take that into account, we look at the archetype power slightly. So then I can look at all the colors in a particular set and convert the disproportion in color win rates into numbers, and then basically look at that from the perspective of color balance. So this is the hypotheticals, just to give you some impressions. If I have 5 colors and all of them will have 56% win rate, this is a perfectly balanced format. Every color has the same win rate. It doesn't matter which color you draft, your average win rate will be the same. Perfectly balanced. This is the set where there is a slight imbalance, but it's a very, very slight imbalance. You can see that the average is the same, 56% win rate, which is close to what the average 17 lands user win rate is. And there's white has 58% win rate, black has 54. So, white is stronger than black in this format, but the difference is not large. And it looks like a fairly balanced set, but you have some kind of differences. Here we look at the format that is quite imbalanced. White has a 62% win rate. Blue has only 50% win rate. Now, that's a big gap between how good white and blue is. So probably this is the kind of a format when you would try to avoid playing blue and you would try to draft white quite heavily. And this would change quite a lot of things. Average win rate is still the same as it was, 56%. But this format is very imbalanced, and there's big differences. And and especially one color is very, very much stronger than the rest, and one color is much, much weaker than the rest. So you got this kind of polarized colors in the format. And then there's the last example, and here we also have the same average win rate of 56%, but 4 colors are tied for being the best, and 1 color is absolutely atrocious in comparison. So you see 20 percentage point win rate difference between 4 main colors and the struggling one. That means that basically you can draft any combinations of these four and probably hard avoid drafting green in this kind of scenario. As the green has only 40% win rate, the rest of them has 60% win rate. So yeah, you definitely want to avoid it. So these are some scenarios of what can happen, but how we can measure that. And I think that the first and easiest way of measuring it's standard deviation. So you can basically measure the standard deviation of all the 5 color win rates. Standard deviation is a term from maths, and it's basically how much do win rates deviate from their average. So, for example, from our first hypothetical, when all of them would be 56%, all colors have 56% win rate. Standard deviation is 0 because none of them deviates from the average. In our second case, when we had them stuff between 58 and 54%, but still with the average of 56, our standard deviation becomes like 0.016. That's relatively small, but it's there. If we have the extreme example, when we had a win rate of 62% for white decks and win rate of 50% for blue decks, here we have the standard deviation of 0.045. So it's 3 times bigger than the standard deviation of the previous example. And last example, when 4 decks have 60%, 4 colors have 60% win rate, and the last one has 40% win rate, we have a huge standard deviation of 0.089, so roughly double the one from the previous slide, and roughly 6 times bigger than the example from example with a small variance. Now, this is one of the way of measuring, but not the only one that I could come up with. Second way that we can look at it is the range, the win rate difference between the top color and the bottom color. So basically, in the example with the deviation, we have white winning 62% of the games and blue winning 50% of the games. The difference between those is 12 percentage points. So that's your spread of the data, basically. You can look at it and you can assume that sets with higher spread between the top and the bottom color will have also higher standard variation. And then there's another method, because these first two methods don't tell us much about what's going on in there. So we can have a large standard deviation because one set is clearly weaker than the rest, but you can also have the large standard deviation because one color is significantly stronger than the rest. And you don't know that just by looking at the standard deviation, and you won't know that by looking at the spread of the data. So I thought, okay, the other thing to check would be maybe looking at the difference between the middle color and the bottom color, because that would, in combination with the other metrics, tell me something more. So for example, here in this hypothetical, white has the highest win rate of 62%. Second win rate is green with 58. Third win rate is black with 56. So that's our middle win rate. And then there's red with 54 and blue with 50. So the spread between the middle, black at 56 and blue at 50, is 6 percentage points. So that will be our spread. Now here, you will know that if there is a high variance, high standard deviation, but low difference between the middle and the bottom, we know that we have an outlier on the top. But if we have a high variance and a high difference between the middle and the bottom, we will know that it's the bottom color that is an outlier in the data set. So we can basically, using that, estimate what's the situation without looking at multiple graphs every single time. Right. So here there are some real data from the last 3 sets, and you can see that Alchemy Horizons, Baldur's Gate, you can see that white, black, red, and green have quite similar win rates. So white has 59.6, black has 58.4, red has 58, and green has 57.7. And blue has only 54.4% win rate. So that's the blue is the outlier in this particular set. It's much lower win rate than any other color. If we look at the streets of New Capenna, we see a slightly different pattern. We have first two colors ex aequo are white and blue at 58.5% win rate. And then we have green with 56, black with 55.1, and red with 54.4. So we have two better archetypes than the rest, and then relatively even three archetypes at the bottom that only differ by 1.6 percentage point. And the third of the sets from the last three sets is Kamiganian Dynasty. And there we have actually a very small spread. The top archetype is black with 57.9, and the bottom archetype is red with 56% win rate. So the difference between top and bottom is less than 2 percentage points. So a very small difference between them. So using those metrics, we can look at all the recent sets. And when we look at the standard deviation, the two sets with highest standard deviation are actually Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate and Streets of New Capenna. Both have the standard deviation of roughly 2 percentage points. And as I told you, those standard deviations from those two sets are due to two different reasons. In Baldur's Gate, it was because blue is very poor compared to the other colors. In Streets of New Capenna, it was because white and blue are stronger than anything else. Then we have like a bunch of sets that have a roughly 1.5 percentage points, 1.4 percentage points deviation, standard deviation, and that's M21, AFR, Kaldheim, Midnight Hunt, and Strixhaven. They are roughly equal. And then we have three sets that have a significantly lower standard deviation into their win rates. In Zendika Rising at 0.9 percentage points, Kamigawa at 0.8 percentage points, and Crimson Vow roughly 0.6 percentage points. So basically, using this metrics, Crimson Vow seems to be the most balanced set in terms of color balance. And Baldur's Gate is definitely the most imbalanced set of the big recent year or 2 years probably. Now, when we look at the spread between the sets in terms of their win rates, again, number one, we have Baldur's Gate at 5.2% percentage point spread between the top archetype and the bottom archetype. Streets of New Capenna and M21 around 4%. Then we have slightly lower AFR and mid at 3.7, 3.5. Then we go to the 3 percentage point spread between the top and bottom in Strixhaven and Kaldheim. Roughly 2 in Zendika Rising and 1.8 in the Kamigawa and Crimson Vow. So as you can see, these two stay as the most balanced sets, Kamigawa and Crimson Vow, also according to the second metric. And again, Baldur's Gate is the most imbalanced set, also according to this metric. Then when we look at the difference between the middle archetype and the bottom, again, Baldur's Gate, most imbalanced. There is a difference of 3.6 percentage points between the middle color and the bottom color. And then we have Kaldheim at second place with 2.7 percentage points. But if you look at here, Kaldheim was quite low on this metric. So the difference between the top archetype of Kaldheim and the bottom archetype of Kaldheim is 2.8 percentage points. And the difference between the middle archetype in Kaldheim and the bottom archetype in Kaldheim is 2.7, only 0.1 difference. And this means that the difference between top archetype in Kaldheim and the middle archetype in Kaldheim is only 0.1 percentage points, which means that colors 1, 2, and 3 in terms of highest win rate are basically exactly the same, and then the last two colors vary by quite a lot. So Kaldheim was definitely a format where 3 colors were much better than the other 2, and it was in the Naya colors that all the power was located according to the 17 lands data. So you can see that Kaldheim went from being like the fourth from the last to second by changing the metric, and you can draw slightly different conclusions. Then we have mid, which is roughly the same as Kaldheim. So that's also a format where there is a small difference between third best color and the first best color. Then we have M21, AFR at 2.2, 2.3 percentage point difference between middle and bottom. Zendika Rising and Streets of New Capenna at 1.6. And here we see a completely different thing. You see Streets of New Capenna only 1.6 percentage point difference between the middle and the bottom color. And it was 4.1 between the top and the bottom. Which means that here there is a big difference between the top two colors and the middle one. And in fact, that's exactly the case in this format. And then we have Strixhaven, Crimson Vow, and Neo at around 1 percentage points difference between middle and bottom. So they are quite even in there. And according to this metric, actually, Neo Kamigawa is the most balanced set. So there is almost no difference between the third best color and the worst color. But Crimson Vow is also there, second to last, and Strixhaven is third to last. So as you can see from those, at least looking at this data, probably the answer to my Twitter poll question is that Crimson Vow is the most balanced color in the last years, and followed quite closely by Kamigawa, and then Strixhaven is a bit further back. Now, this is not the absolute answer to that question, and I'm pretty sure that you can measure it in a slightly different way, coming to a slightly different answer. But that, to me, just looking at the color win rate was not sufficient, because I have something else. I had something else in the back of my mind that the win rates don't capture very well. So only looking at the color win rates does not tell you the whole picture, because if I'm winning quite a lot with the one color, but I can only play it once every 12 drafts, while I play the other color every second draft, this is not a very well balanced color for me. So Small Sam says, I could go on at length as to why I think Vow isn't balanced. You could, but I think color balance in Vow was pretty good. You could play any color, and there was no problem in playing any color. Maybe not any color combination, but every color was very playable. I think that only green was lagging behind very slightly, but that was actually fixed quite a lot by the drafting preferences. But okay, let's go back to the seminar. Another way of looking at balance is, are all the colors equally draftable? Look, I mean, I think that format where everything is viable and every color combination and every color is fine to draft is going to have bigger replayability than the format when only 3 colors are good and you avoid 2 other ones. Good players are notoriously picky, and that means that if they think one color is much weaker, they will hard avoid it. And we see that in data. We literally can see that in data that 17 lens players will avoid the color that is deemed to be poor, or a color that maybe they didn't figure out the way of playing correctly. They will avoid that, and they will draft with preferences. That's what 17 lens users do, because it's a good strategy. Because if you understand the format and you have enough information to have a preference, then having preferences in draft is not a stupid idea. It's basically a subconscious version of basing your draft preferences on data. So color preferences of the large cohort of 17 lens user will be a good proxy for that kind of balance, a balance in the strength, perceived strength of the colors, and when you can draft it. So, oh, I'm in the wrong window. There we go. So first of all, let's look at the color play rate. Now, I also looked at 2 color decks, which means that the average should be 40%, because 40% of the archetypes have each color. So if every color will be drafted 40% of the time, it means it's a perfectly balanced format. Now, let's look at Baldur's Gate. And white was drafted 60% of the time, so almost 50% more than you would expect it to be drafted if it was a balanced format. Blue was drafted 15% of the time. Now that's 25 percentage points lower than it should be drafted. That's huge. That's huge. That's less than half of what you would expect it to be drafted in a balanced environment. And then we have black at 48.9, so slightly above the average, red at 44.3, so slightly more above average, and green 31, so below average. So basically it was drafted as much lower than as black was drafted higher, basically. But you see this big disproportion that white was drafted almost 4 times more often than blue was drafted by the 17 lens users. And I didn't check it, but I'm pretty sure that if you only look at the top tier of 17 lens players, the ones with the highest win rates and over multiple formats, you would see that this proportion maybe increase. Maybe not. Let's see. Maybe best players. You have to. I'm sorry. Overcome this problem. Now, if we look at the streets of New Capenna, 55.3% was drafting white. That's also almost as high as it was in Baldur's Gate. But then we have a moderately even format with the blue drafted 43%, black drafted 39%, so almost bang in the middle where it should be. Red 35.2, so roughly 5 percentage point lower than it should be, and green being underdrafted. So the difference between what is expected from white and what we can see is more or less the same as what is expected with green and what we can see. Now, this is based only on 2-color decks, and Streets of New Capenna was a 3-color format. So possibly some of the bias in here is from not looking at the complete data. And then lastly, we have Kamigawa, and here we have a really balanced format. So white was drafted 38% of the time, blue 39.7, so almost dead on the spot where it should be. Black 52.4, so 12 percentage points higher than would be expected. And black was drafted higher than expected, mainly because red and green were underdrafted by roughly 5 percentage points at 35% drafting frequency. So these are the last 3 sets, but how does it look like across the gradient of those formats? So the standard deviation of those frequencies of drafting, so again, how much do those values on average diverge from the 40, basically? And again, we see Baldur's Gate is the most imbalanced in terms of the frequency. So blue was not only the poorest color by far, the most imbalanced in terms of win rate, but it also happened while the color was drafted the least from all the other colors in any other set that we had in the last 2 years. So this is like a double whammy for that set. That blue was not only the poorest color, but also, even if people were not drafting it enough, it was still not winning, because not even openness could somehow complement the low power level of the set. The second most imbalanced format in terms of colors play rate was AFR, which doesn't surprise in that. Looking at the similarities between blue and AFR and Baldur's Gate. And then we have Call Time, where the Naya colors were drafted higher than Dimir. And then we have Midnight Hunt, Streets of New Capenna, M21. Numbers here don't matter that much, but the absolute changes tell you something. We have also Zendika Rising, and we have 3 colors the 3 sets that are really close to each other in terms of balance and drafting colors, and that's Crimson Vow, Strixhaven, and Kamigawa. Again, those 3 appear as the 3 most balanced sets, also according to this metric. But Kamigawa is the winner in terms of like most balanced draft. So Crimson Vow was drafted in a balanced way, so all the colors were drafted almost equally, and at the same time, it also was the set with the lowest differences between the win rates of colors. So you have, from two different aspects, the set was balanced, which again brings it to me as a top favorite for being the most balanced format of the last couple of years. Now, what's the difference between the most played versus the least played? And this time it's not percentages, it's default change. What it means is that the most played color in Baldur's Gate was played 3.8 times more frequently than the least played color. So almost 4 times more frequently people played white than they played blue in this format, as I mentioned before. And then second place for that is AFR. And it's the same. Like I think it was black in AFR, but black was 3 times more frequently played than blue was. Then we have a bunch of formats when it's around 2. In terms of how more frequently is the top versus the second most played color played. And at the end, we have the same 3 colors that we always had, Crimson Vow, Kamigawa, and Strixhaven, with only 50% difference between how frequently is the top and the bottom colors played. And lastly, I have the same, there we go. Lastly, I have the same for the comparison between medium played color versus least played color. And again, Heroes, Baldur's Gate and AFR at 3.1 and 2.7 fold difference between how often you play the medium archetype and the least played. So big difference between those. Then a bunch of them that are twice as frequently played, the medium played archetype and the least played in Midnight M21, Midnight Hunt, Kaldheim, and Zendikar Rising. Then 3 sets at around 1.5 with Crimson Vow, Streets of New Capenna. So there was actually not a big difference between how often people played the third most played color and the least played color in Streets of New Capenna. Because the main problem of Streets of New Capenna was that those 2 top colors that were played just more frequently and they had much higher win rates. And Kamigawa Neon Dynasty is dead last in this one. So the difference between the medium played and the least played was just 10%. So people played almost as much of the least played color as they did of the middle played color. So that set was quite even in that aspect. But in general, it was quite even. So we're coming to the Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate Rebalance, and it was the first time it was done, and that's basically for WotC and for us also. It's a proving ground for balancing in the future. So basically, was it successful? Did they manage to nail it, or was it a failure? And what do you think in the chat? Did the balancing work for you? If you played the format, do you think that they achieved the success? Is the format less imbalanced in terms of looking at the same metrics that I was looking before, or the differences still remain? So Small Sam says that he thinks it's an overall improvement in balance. Yeah. And Chuck Noblock says, I think it's been great. I'd guess very well balanced now. Okay, so let's look, because I have the data in the end. I mean, I can go with the cliffhanger mode for the next 5 minutes, but there's no point really. So first of all, these are the win rates of colors before and after. Before that, it was 59.6 win rate in white, 54.4 in blue, 58.4 in black, 58 in red, 57.7 in green. Now we have 58.6, 58.4, 58.3, 58.2, 58.8 in green. So green is the strongest color, and it's the whole massive 0.6 percentage points higher win rate than the weakest color, which is now red. Most importantly, the gap between blue and the other colors has been completely closed. So basically, all the colors are on parity right now in terms of the win rate. But that's not the complete story that we have. So we can say that Based on the win rates, the set has been amazingly balanced. I mean, this is a phenomenal result in terms of balancing. But there is also the color play frequency balance, and that's not as good as the win rate balance. So we basically had 60% of the decks played white and only 15% of the decks played blue. Now it's 56.7% that plays white, so very, very minor decrease. And there is a solid increase in people playing blue. It went up from 15.7 to 24.7, but it's still like just more than 50% of what you would what you would hope to be having for a perfectly color balanced format. So and there's been drops of people playing black. So mind that white and black were the two colors where there were those negative buffs on some cards, and you see that they drop in play rate. There's been a drop in play rate in red, mainly probably because they lowered the power of the aggro decks yeah, that's the thing. And there's been an increase in playing green because green got a boost in most of the cards. So Trail of Magic is asking, that's just people not adjusting, right? Well, it's hard to say really, because when you look at the win rates, people adjusted perfectly. Every color has now the same win rate. So they adjusted just the right amount, which means blue is still weaker, but at least with the balance changes, you play it weaker, less, but when it's open, it's actually playable. And you can get a reasonable win rate with blue. But probably if 17 lens users would start to try to play blue 40% of the time, it wouldn't still be powerful enough. So they would lose those points of win rate. So blue is good, but only if it's open. And white, on the other hand, people play 56% of their decks in white, and they have the same win rate as they do in blue, which means that white is just a stronger color combination, and you will get there into a solid deck more frequently. So that's the thing. This is the part of the balance that is self-correcting. In some formats, the win rates might be across the board, but you have to know that certain colors need to be open and certain colors are just generically good, and you can sort of semi-force it unless they're really, really contested on the board. And this is the case in this format. And as Small Sam said, at least blue is good if it's open, unlike before. So what the balancing has changed is that blue now is playable, but blue now is still not a strong color. It requires certain amount of being open based on what the data is suggesting right now. Okay, but let's look at those rebalancing data that I showed you before with the second coming of the Baldur's Gate set. When we look at the standard deviation of color win rates, and we're talking about the color win rates, Baldur's Gate, after rebalancing, is the most balanced set in the last years, and by quite a lot. Mission accomplished there for WotC. They did an amazing job. They wanted to rebalance the set, and in terms of color win rates, they nailed it. Let's go further. Delta win rate between top and the bottom color, only 0.6 percentage points difference in Okay, let's pause it. Let's pause this graph for a second because Trail of Magic has another question, and it's a good one. How do you distinguish between people not drafting it because of old biases rather than the color not being open? I can't, but I can see that the win rates are even, and based on the fact that win rates are even, I can sort of guess that if draft rate of blue would increase, the win rate would drop because it would become overdrafted in those situations. So I can sort of say that right now people are either because of old biases or because of a self-regulating nature of draft. I'm pretty sure that all biases are playing a role there, but there might be also a counterbalancing effect of people trying to check the new cards out. But somehow, by whichever method, we arrived at the moment when the win rates are balanced because of that. So I can't tell you why people are disproportionately underdrafting blue. Is it power? Is it all the biases? Is it a combination of those? Or is there excluding forces of curiosity acting on top of that? It doesn't matter. The result is win rates are level, and that's the important part of it there. So yeah, it was 5.2 percentage point difference between blue and the best color combination. Now the difference is 0.6 and 0.6 percentage points different. And more importantly, it's not even blue that is the bottom color. Blue is actually the middle one. The bottom color is red, albeit by 0.2 percentage points, and still the the sample sizes are not amazingly huge, but it's something, something to keep in mind. The difference between the middle archetype blue and the bottom red is only 0.2 percentage points. That's also like markedly smaller difference than any other set. So in terms of the rebalance, in terms of color win rates, this has been a resounding success from the WotC side in terms of rebalancing. And possibly this was helped by how people were still biased against blue, as you said. Possibly there was some other things playing around. But the result is that the difference between middle archetype, middle color, and the bottom color in Baldur's Gate before rebalancing was 3.6 percentage points. Now it's 0.2 percentage points. So basically, you have 1.8 18-fold decrease, basically, of that difference, and it's better than in any other set. Okay. In terms of the color use frequency, rebalance has been successful to some extent. So the standard deviation in color use in Baldur's Gate before was this 8.5% roughly, and now it's 5.9%. So there is a smaller variance, but it's still not the smallest of all the sets. It's in the middle of the pack. Let's call it, which is successful because they were probably aiming at reducing this color use frequency differences, but it didn't put it completely to the bottom. So again, this to me indicates that part of the win rate imbalance. Part of the win rate balance between colors is the avoiding of blue and only going into it when it's properly open. In terms of the difference, default change between the most played and the least played archetype, it was 3.8 times more played the top archetype than the bottom archetype. Now it's 2.3, so quite a large decrease, and now it's in the middle of the pack again, like with the standard deviation of that value. And it's exactly the same default change between medium played archetype versus the least played archetype. The medium played archetype is still 1.8 times more played than the bottom archetype. And blue is still the bottom archetype, despite not being the bottom archetype in terms of win rate. So in terms of the rebalance, in terms of the color preferences by the players, there is definitely a success because it decreased, but it's not as a resounding success as in terms of the color win rates. And I think that the color win rates would have gone down if the color frequency use would be perfectly balanced. So basically, that suggests to me that the success of the rebalance by the WotC was halfway. So they managed to improve blue by a lot, but it's still not a color that you can just force draft. You need to you need to basically have it open to some extent. Okay, now let's look at some last slide in terms of looking at the archetype win rates and card win rates, and looking at the cards that are directly impacted by the tweaks and the cards that are having some knock-on effects. So basically, they become either poorer or better by because other cards changed. So first of all, Biggest success stories of the rebalanced HBG. Is it? It had 49% win rate before rebalancing. It has 59.1 right now. So 10 percentage points difference in win rate. That's massive. That's huge. Mind, is still played not much. So it is not an archetype that you can force. It has a high win rate, but its high win rate is based on the fact that people play it scarcely. Second big story, success story, Simic. 55% win rate before the rebalancing, third lowest of all the color combinations, and it skyrocketed into the best color combination at 60.9. So that's pretty impressive. Now, let me look at one thing. Where did I lose it? Somewhere here. I just tried to look at the play rate of those color combination. So Simic was the second least played archetype before the rebalancing, and now it is fourth least played. So it's still not played frequently, but it's played frequently enough that it increased in terms of how frequently it's being played. So again, strong archetype if it is open, so you can't really like go in and force it. Some more moderate successes there. Golgari increased by roughly 3 percentage points from 57 to 60. And again, let's look at Golgari. Golgari was played 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fifth most commonly played archetype, and now it is still fifth. So not much change, but it caught up a bit of a massive gap with Rakdos actually. So now it's almost the same, played at the same frequency as Rakdos was, but the difference between them in the first rebalancing was almost twofold. So Golgari is probably one of those archetypes that gained, and it's probably you can probably play it when it's slightly less open. I mean, you still probably need to get your Myconids and whatnot, but it's all right. Now, other archetypes gained some small amount of win rates, roughly 2 percentage points for Azorius, roughly 1 percentage point for Demir, with those sample sizes that's oscillating around the margin of error. 0.7 percentage point for Gruul. That's margin of error, really. And there are 4 archetypes that dropped in win rates. And also, these are the top 4. So these are the ones that WotC targeted to reduce their win rate by ever so slightly. And here we have Selesnya, which dropped from 60.1 to 57.9. And that drop might be actually ironically due to green becoming more popular with other combinations because green is more challenged and therefore you don't get those Basto Selesnya decks anymore. Then we have Orzhov dropping at around 1.5 percentage point from 60 to 58.5. Rakdos dropped by roughly 1 percentage point from 58 to 57. And Boros is roughly in the same spot because it dropped from 59.9 to 59.8. The difference that is, well, purely mathematical in this case. Right. So as you can see, this is again shows slight success of the rebalancing. The top 4 archetypes had the slight drops of win rate. The bottom archetype had the biggest increase, and generally now the win rates across the archetypes are also more even than they used to be. Now, which cards gained most on the rebalance? Here we have looking at all the cards in the set, all rarities. The top cards, which increased in win rate compared to the pre-tweak, pre-rebalance situation. Dragonborn Looter, the 2 mana and now 1 mana, 1/2 that loots for 1 mana. That gained 9.3 percentage points in win rate between pre-rebalance and post-rebalance. So a lot. Second, Druid Ritual, the card that allowed you to return mail free and then return a land and a creature. Now you can choose which combination you want. You can have one of each or both to have returned to your hand. Also, 9 percentage point increase in the win rate. Oh, Tresio. Oh, you mean overall win rate for the format as a totality? Okay. I would have to check it. Just give me a sec. But it's not there. It's slightly higher, but it's not much higher. Format color rankings. No, why do I have to scroll so much? Up. So the win rate for before the rebalancing was 57.2 for all the decks, and now it is rebalanced 58.3. So there's a 1 percentage point difference between the win rates from before the rebalance and after the rebalance. Okay, I'm going to show you a question so that people can catch up with it. Now, where is that? Okay. So then we have Val Eager Scholar at 7.6%. Gale's Redirection, the rare counter spell that gained 7 percentage points. Circle of the Land Druid, Titan Evokers, another blue rare. The blue Orb of Dragonkind, Split the Spoils, the graveyard fiction kind of variant. You come to a null camp, a red combat trick. Water Weird, you came to a river, blue commons. Draconic Lore, a dragon-centric draw spell that costs 4 when you control a dragon. Pseudo Dragon Familiar, 2/2 flyer nowadays, 2/1 flyer beforehand. These all gained around 5-6 percentage points. And 2 other cards that gained Charm Sleep and Corlessa Scale Singer. Now, in blue, I selected the cards that have been actually rebalanced. So out of the 15 cards on that list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 are the cards that were rebalanced. So clearly improving or making them better work. The win rates improved vastly in some cases, the Dragonborn Looter and Druidic Ritual especially. Then we have 6 cards on that list that were not changed in any way, but Gale's Redirection, a blue rare, I guess it benefited from blue just becoming stronger. So this card was just like not good enough when the rest of the color did not support it. But now as they get more support from the other cards in the color, it improved vastly. So as you can see, the power of an individual card is not enough if there is no support for that. And the same thing in Titan Evokers, that also increased by 6.6 percentage points. All of a sudden, this card is just becoming much better. It was already good. Now it's the second best card in the format. Only worse than Lae'zel, but better than Hourglass Coven in terms of win rate. So this is something to think about, that how much of the card's win rate depends on the context. I have no explanation why you come to the null camp improved. It might be that a bit more challenge to aggro decks means that they might want to put an extra card that gives them reach. So you come to the null camp, allows you to remove 2 blockers actively. So maybe that's the card that you need now in your aggro decks just to deal this last couple of pieces of damage, and before that you didn't need to. Draconic Lore, that's an interesting one because that card didn't change at all, but with things like Dragonborn Looter becoming better, with things like Pseudo Dragon Familiar becoming better, with things like the Orbs of Dragonkind becoming better and allowing you to play the 3-color decks much easier. Where am I? Why am I not here? Okay. Draconic Lore became a better card because 4 mana for drawing 3 in those kind of mana hungry ramp pseudo ramp decks, it will become better. Also, weakening of the aggro decks gives you more time to play the games, and Draconic Lore also becomes better in those formats that are slightly slower. Um, basically, that's how this card gets improved by sort of how did I call it? Knock-on effect. And we have the same with the Charmed Sleep and Corlessa Scale Singer. These two cards also improved by roughly 5 percentage points. Just probably one Charmed Sleep because blue is better, and Corlessa because dragon decks are better. Because now, if you can play Corlessa and on turn 4, double spell with a 3-drop and a Dragon Ball Looter that you saw from the top of your library, basically drawing your card, you're good. Especially that if you can play dragons at the top of your library, you can loot easier. So that's like an extra synergy between Corlessa, Dragonborn, Looter. If you know what you're going to loot into, you can plan your activations better. And now because Dragonborn Looter is cheaper, you can do that. Now, just looking at the commons only, well, we've seen most of those cards until Water Weird before. No, you come to the river and Pseudo Dragon Familiar. We also saw, but we have other cards. The Young Blue Dragon improved by 5 percentage points. Rhyme Shield Frost Giant 4.8. Soul Knife Spy 4.8. Young Red Dragon 4.7. Hypnotic Pattern 4.3. Eyes of the Beholder 4.1 and Manticore 4.0. Now, especially the last two, quite impressive. They improved by 4 percentage points with black color combination deck dropping ever so slightly. So white black dropped, Rakdos dropped in the win rate, and we had Golgari increase and Dimir increasing only very slightly. So quite impressive that those two cards that were rebalanced actively got better just because of the rebalance, and we can actually measure by how much. And again, as you can see, out of those 15 commons that I showed had the biggest difference in win rate between rebalanced and non-rebalanced version, there are 10 that were rebalanced. And here, except for the ones that I mentioned, and you come to the Null Camp and Charmed Sleep, Rhyme Shield, Frost Giant, and Soul Knife Spy, probably just because blue became better, and Hypnotic Pattern also because blue became better. So the format also slowed down slightly, so Hypnotic Pattern becomes even stronger. But 10 out of the 15 most improved cards being the ones that were actively rebalanced shows that the rebalancing, again, was a successful strategy for WotC this time. We don't praise them often, so if they do something correctly and it gets a good result and for the benefit of the players, I'm going to say good things about WotC for that kind of situations. Now, another story is the cards that became worse. And this is based on all the cards. We have the biggest losers of the rebalancing were Thieves' Tools and Hook Horror at 5.10 and 5.3 percentage points drop in win rate. No good explanation why, but that's the facts of life. Steadfast Unicorn is the first card that was actually rebalanced that dropped in win rate, and by 5 percentage points. So Steadfast Unicorn was a great card with a very high win rate in the original version. Rebalancing changed it significantly for the worse, and you can see that in the numbers. And then we have some Earth Cult Elemental that dropped by quite a lot. I think that this is just not the thing that you want to ramp into, as the dragon strategies became ever so slightly more impressive. They have Horn of Valhalla, and Rally Maneuver that dropped by around 4%. Blessed Hippogriff, that's the second card of the list that had the big drop in win rate, 4 percentage points. So just increasing that cost of the trick by 1 mana, smacked it quite extensively. And then we have some rares, Lucamina, Hourglass Coven. I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. It might be just a sample size. But we have a bunch of white cards in Dawnbringer Cleric, Celestial Unicorn, older Raven Guard Marshal, we have a drop for Kalane and Raphael, so 2 black-red spells, and Poison the Blade dropped by 3 percentage points, possibly because, well, actually, I have no good explanation why they dropped. Again, probably small sample size. But interestingly, and I think that I strongly approve of the approach that WotC took there. Instead of nerfing lots of things, they buffed a bunch of things and tried to achieve the rebalancing by more buffing than nerfing. I think it's a good strategy because I think that psychologically I would be angry if I liked the card in the draft format and WotC would come and nerf it, and I would just go like, well, now I have to play with my favorite card in the version that's unplayable. What am I supposed to do? But improving cards that were poor, it's only giving me positive things because it's, oh, I remember the times when I couldn't play that card and now I'm winning with it. So that's great. So I think that this kind of positive approach is decent, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't nerf my favorite card. It's just that the nerf is maybe less apparent to me because the nerf is only visible by lowering the win rate of my card without changing it, because in comparison to the boosted cards, it is not as strong as it used to be. So I think that's a very cunning way of game design that makes the user more satisfied with what they are receiving. And when we look at the commons, there's another card that was slightly nerfed, Guildsworn Prowler. There's a 3 percentage points drop in the win rate. And I'm actually surprised that it's only so little, because I thought that this was the biggest nerf, because I can take damage from a 1/1 Death Toucher all day, no problem. 2/1 Death Toucher finishes me very quickly. And I had many games when I just like, I can't do anything there. How am I going to turn the corner without sacrificing a large blocker? Always buckets of sweat, whether they have the Linworm sorcery that will kill like 4 creatures of mine if I dub multi-block, or if I single block makes it survive, or do they have the Griffin? They always had the Griffin, of course. It was a problematic card. Now I just can ignore it for most of it, and it's still good because you can probably sacrifice it to draw a card, or you can chump something big or whatever. But there's a drop of it. I just didn't expect that this drop is going to be so small. Out of important card, I think there is a slight drop in Soldiers of the Watch and slight drop in Sepulchral Ghoul in terms of win rate of roughly 3% in case of Soldiers and 1.5 Sepulchral Ghoul. So only 3 of the commons that were nerfed are on that list, but on the other hand, not many things were nerfed. So the ones that were are there on the list, the most powerful offenders. And initially, I thought, well, they should also nerf the Patriarch's humiliation. But the longer I think about it, maybe good that they left it like that, so there's no feels bad about cards being nerfed that you like playing. So I think in general, WotC did an all right job with that. And to conclude, balance is hard to define, and there's multiple ways of doing that. But independently of what we did with the data, it seems to me that it's somewhere between Crimson Vow, Strixhaven, and Kamigawa, with most likely candidate being Crimson Vow and the second most likely being Kamigawa. These were the most balanced sets of the last couple of years. The rebalancing that WotC did worked. The set is much more balanced in terms of win rate, but it's partially because people stuck to their disproportionate drafting different colors. What mainly the rebalance changed is blue is now playable, but it has to be open to have a high win rate, most likely. And again, a measure of success of the WotC rebalance is that worst color improved, best colors decreased their win rates ever so slightly. The biggest movers in terms of win rate for individual cards were the cards that were balanced. Some of the biggest movers in terms of cards that were nerfed are that decreased their win rate are the cards that were nerfed. And in general, the format is more balanced. So I think it was a successful experiment. It will be interesting to see that happen again. Hopefully not too often, because damn, that's a lot of data analysis to get some kind of useful answers from that kind of data set. And yes, with that, I bid you adieu. But before I go, I would like to thank the 17 Lands team. The rebalance was not an easy thing for them, especially with holiday period for everyone. It was not difficult. It was not easy for them to get everything online, but they managed, because they always manage, because they are amazing people. So send some hugs and your hard-earned dollars to their Patreon and support them whenever you can. Tell people about them, praise their activities, and especially Viral Misnomer, who is the Mr. 17 Lens themselves. There's Hululu, Grant Wu, and Ale Ballini, who is now hopefully not in the chat. He should be asleep on his holidays. So hopefully he's having a nice, well-deserved break from, several days of trying to fix the rebalancing issues on 17 lands. On top of that, I would like to thank Fake Jake Brown, who is my secret, not so secret helper, also known as Uncle Cardboard. He helps me putting out this seminar in the form of podcast, because he's a genius in, sound editing and prepping things so that they seem neat. So yeah, if you are interested, I think that he is going to start some kind of activity helping content creators to get their content out in the most amazing way. And I highly recommend. Jake is super good, and I wouldn't be probably as regular in putting my stuff on YouTube and as a podcast if I didn't have his amazing help. When we are on the podcast topic, I would also like to thank Asescu and Mana Junkie for the song we use as the intro. And I would like to thank my sponsor again, tgazone.com. And with that, I'll see you next week.